Welcome to First Dates and Soulmates. I'm your host, Nikki McKnight.
And I'm Meg Casebolt. Hey.
And this is the podcast where we love when people have like a secret identity and then they come to small towns and they just create beautiful, wonderful chaos and adopt cute puppies.
Everyone loves a basset hound.
Like, I just want dogs now. I really do. And I'm so excited today because, Meg, we have a guest with us today. Today we are joined by author Kay Stirling. Kay Stirling is a history nerd, Lord of the Rings fan, publishing dozens of queer romance novels, including the popular Nannies of New York series, which I have talked about on this show before, the Nelson MacIlwraith series, The Boys of Lake Cliff, and now has a spin-off series to the Nannies of New York. Book 2 is coming out very shortly. Please welcome to the show, Kay Stirling.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me, guys. I'm so excited.
Welcome. We're thrilled to have you here.
Thank you for reaching out and pitching yourself. You know, we often are talking about other people's books and they're like, thanks so much for this. And they don't write back and say, hey, let me come on. And I just love that you did that and self-advocated for yourself that way. So kudos to you.
Thank you. I'm trying to get out more. I'm trying to get out more in like 2025. Like that's my thing. Even though this is like the worst year to try to make that year. Meet more people. No, I don't want to meet more people this year. But no, I'm at least like podcasts seem like a cool kind of outlet to kind of explore and kind of dip my toe in the
I love it. Yeah, as to, you know, I feel like as a self-published author, self-published authors are entrepreneurs. We are both entrepreneurs who own our own businesses, and pressure and discomfort is the price of admission for a lot of what we do. You're welcome.
Boy, howdy.
Thank you. Yes. So I would love to just kind of kick us off with your origin story. You know, how did you get into writing? When did this become a thing that you're like, hey, I think I could do this, and I think I could do this more and more and more, because you do have a lot of work out there now. So, Kay, tell us, where did it begin?
Well, there was this meteor that no, like anytime somebody says tell us your origin story, I always think about something like that. But no, it was more like a dare. Like I was really, I think a lot of women go through this, or just a lot of parents in general, where you kind of lose your identity in parenthood, and you know, the grind of like keeping a house running and getting everybody to school and to work and stuff. And I was going through some serious depression because I had worked, I was in the Army, and, you know, I had, you know, a really active career for a moment, and then I fell into the mom track on accident. So yeah, I was really struggling, and my husband was like, I thought you said you wanted to be a writer, like back in the day. And I was like, yeah, but nobody's ever going to read anything I write. And it's just, you know, how am I going to get into that? It's, you know, so he was like, well, I'll read it. So it was like a really passive aggressive, shitty thing on my behalf. I was like, fine, I'll write a bodice ripper.
Yeah, make like, you read that, husband.
It was like, yeah, but it was like everything like I've ever read in any romance novel. Like, because I was a voracious romance reader before I was a writer. And so I just shoved everything into that book. And I was like, just to like make him uncomfortable, because I was like really looking forward to it. So I finished this book, and he was like, yeah, but I'm not reading that. I was like, what? And he was like, go publish it. Go out there and start pitching that book and publish that book. And so I did send it off to a few places. But in the meantime, while I was waiting for responses, which they all got back to me and said no. But in the meantime, I had self-published it, and it took off. Like it was way back in like the 2014, like the indie publishing heyday. And it did really good. So he was like, well, do another one, and then do another one. So that's just kind of how it started, on a dare. But, you know, and I have to say that he does read a lot of my books, and he's, you know, and it was more of like he was just being a goofball, but he ended up narrating some of my books. So he's been like the most supportive, like, spouse ever. He's amazing.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I love that. It's like, it's a dare that turned into like an attempt at revenge. And then you're like, oh, now it's like a career. I love how that happened. Cause like Meg, your husband sometimes reads your stuff, but also he's like not quite your jam.
I don't think he's made it past chapter 2 of anything I've read.
Oh,
he wants to be supportive. He listens to the podcast, but it's just not what he wants to. He's not a big reader either. He's like a podcast listener. So I think if I had it as an audiobook, he might listen to it, but like, it's just not him. And that's okay. Right. Like he can support me in different ways, but no, thinking of him doing the audiobook for it is just laughable.
Oh my
Oh,
God.
I'm
Can
telling you,
we have a meeting?
yeah, that's a great thing. If you can get your spouse into a recording booth and make them read some really like high heat smut,
Oh my
recommend it.
God.
It's amazing.
Oh my God. Like I actually like I would just want to get some people to do that because many years ago, my brother for Christmas, he recorded himself reading this book that my sister-in-law loved and gave it to her as like a Christmas gift because she liked to
Oh,
listen to it to go to sleep. And he was working nights at the time, so he
No.
wasn't there when she go to bed. So he recorded this whole book, and I just like, I love this where your husband is like, maybe I don't, I may read it, I may not, I may get it, I may not. I may read your book on audio. Like, what the shit? That just sounds like a good book in general to be written. Plot money for anyone who wants to pick that up because I'm sure as hell not going to write it. But
Yeah, no, that's a great idea.
Delightful.
I actually, you were talking before we started about how like your next date night is going to be the specific Lego set. And I'm like, no, a really good date night would be a recording booth.
no, and I'm gonna tell you you're wrong. You're wrong because it almost broke up our marriage. Like,
Oh my gosh.
because if you've written a book, you're very protective and of your characters, and they sound a certain way in your head, and the dialogue sounds a certain way in your head. And I'm a super control freak, so we might have done like 50 takes on some of these things, but like, that was trash. Do it again. And you were just like, I hate this. So yeah, it almost killed our marriage. It sounds fun, but it's also really hard, and I felt so bad because to jump in like having never narrated anything, I don't think people realize how hard narration is.
It's so hard.
Like just the stuff is crazy hard.
I feel like that's such like an interesting discussion too, just about like any type of creative pursuit. When you put it out into the world for feedback from a friend or spouse, from an editor, eventually from the audience, when like the reviews start coming in, like I know I could not do that. I'm a people pleaser and people hurt my feelings very easily. I would not be able to be like that. I'll say vulnerable to have work out into the world that would offer that type of feedback. Like, Kay, what did it feel like when you kind of had the first book or two out and it wasn't just you and your husband looking at it anymore? It wasn't maybe just a friend reading it. It was actually out into the world. Like, how did that feel when that first happened?
Kind of like a nightmare. It's like, you ever have the dream where you're naked in public?
Yeah.
It's very much that kind of thing. And
Mm-hmm.
like you were just saying, like you'd read some of my books, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm dying inside because I just want people to buy the books
Yeah.
and don't
Mhm.
read them and don't look at me in the eyes.
No, you
after
can read them. Don't talk to me about them.
Okay, yeah,
No.
yeah, and it's just like I don't want my friends and family to read my book.
Mhm.
Like it was so funny because like I redacted one for my mom to read. It was Mary and Wright, and I remember I cut out all the smut parts, and she used my Kindle. And then after she read it, I got it back and I realized she read the Kindle version that I hadn't redacted. And I wanted to die. And she's like, what? I loved it. It was great. And I was just like, you weren't supposed to see all that, Mom.
I actually
But it
don't
happened.
mind when people who I know read it, but it's when they start to talk to me about it where I'm like, like, because, so I've written 2 books, one that's business, it's nonfiction, it's about social media and marketing and stuff. And that when I sent it out, I would have everybody read it. I read it myself to narrate it. Like I had no problem with it. But then when I wrote my romance novel, it was like taking my heart, digging it out of my chest, putting it on a plate and being like, please rate and review.
Oh,
Yeah.
God. No.
Oh, it's terrible. It's the worst thing. Truman Capote. I'm going to sound like a super book snob, and I did this on another podcast once.
I love it.
But
Bring it.
there was this quote about like releasing your book is like putting your child out in the yard and letting people shoot it.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. It's a really violent way to say it, but it legitimately is because like you love these characters, and when people go, well, I hate Lane West, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
my cats. But yeah, it just like when people are like, I hate Lane West, it's like it breaks your heart because you put so much into that character and you know that character's heart, but when it doesn't reach the reader in the right way, it feels terrible.
And
Yeah,
You
it's
hear that?
actually, your cat
I
is
love
sounding like some of these critics, honestly.
honestly.
I'm so
No,
sorry.
well, it's even like William Faulkner, the whole like kill your darlings bit, and then I think Stephen King used it a lot when talking about books and how you might think you have like the greatest ideas in the world, but eventually kill your darlings, kill your darlings, kill your darlings. And again, I think that's another reason why I don't think I could write, because I think everything I think of is brilliant, and I don't think I could kill off any of it.
I think sometimes I have more that I've killed than what I publish.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Like
Wow.
my cutting room floors are sometimes 2 or 3 times the size of the final manuscript, because it's like I have to explore, and then once I explore, I'm like, oh, that's not right. Or no, I don't need that part anymore. But then I keep it for future work. But what's weird, to your point about your mom, like my mom, to support me, bought 20 copies of my book. I released my debut novel last month, or not last month, last year, and she started handing them out to her friends who she knew were romance
Oh,
novel
that's
readers.
bad.
And then some of her friends have been like, so Meg, I read your romance. And I'm like, okay.
No, you didn't. No,
Okay.
you didn't.
What do you want to talk about in it? Because I'm not going to bring up anything in here. And let's talk about the publication process if we're going to have this let's talk about indie publishing. Let's not talk about, especially like some of them are, they're in their 70s, they're in their 80s, and there's a transgender protagonist, and they're like, well, my son had a friend, and I'm like, oh God, no,
Here it comes.
I just don't want it. I appreciate your support for the queer community, but like, does it have to be an in-person where I'm looking at your face?
Yeah,
that would be really awkward. So Kay, when just talking about like your books in general, and Meg and I were talking on another episode we recorded just about working on the next book, and that idea of the cutting room floor and plotting it. What is kind of I'm always fascinated by routines, because as a person with big ADHD energy, like flexible routines are really important to me. So like, how do you kind of, I'll say, live in the day-to-day as an author when it comes to your own kind of habits around that, but also when it comes to, I'll say, maybe plotting or structuring the next thing that you're working on? Because you have this new release that's coming out shortly. You have another one coming up next month. Take us behind the scenes of your process, if you will.
Oh, I'm glad you mentioned process, because I don't have one. No,
Love
I
it.
really don't. It's like you put a bunch of cats in a bag and you shake them up and get them mad and see what comes out. But I'm really lucky that I can stay home and work full time on this. And this is like all I do, other than, the general mom stuff that I have to jump out and do. But my kids are a lot older now, so it's easier. Like my youngest just turned 19, or she's about to, oh God, she's about to turn 20. No, like in a week, literally. But yeah, so it's a lot easier now. So I have the privilege of just being able to, as soon as everybody leaves the house, it's just me and Alex a lot of times during the day. So I can just, once he's settled, I can put on my headphones or whatever and just get into my writing fugue state and just do that until I have to stop for lunch or sleep. And I will just, some days 10, 12 hours at the computer. But I don't really have like I'm working on Tides right now, and I know who they are. I know the general story, and I'll usually just pick a point. Like I'll write the intro, and a lot of times I'll go to the first kiss or the first fuck, or wait, am I allowed to say that? Okay.
Absolutely.
Or the first fight. And I say this a lot of times to my writer buddies, like, once you get them naked or get them fighting, they will tell you everything. So I will jump right into that. And like, once the tea starts spilling, I know, okay, I need to go back and write this in chapter 3, and chapter 4 needs to be about this. And we need to have a naked, food fight here to bring this, along. So that's how I really do it. And then, or I'll jump to the end, and then, so I know where they're going. And it's like, I see the target, and I just know, like, I can go work backwards from it and know what I'm working towards. So that's really how my books come about. I
love that. Let's just get them naked. We're fighting and fornicating. And
that's right. They'll tell you everything. They'll tell you everything.
Oh my God. I love that. Do you find that like your characters, I'll say, speak to you in that way? Like, you say they'll tell you what's going on. Do you have that relationship with your characters in writing?
No, I think it's more like a voyeuristic kind of, like, I'm the fly on the wall, or I'm peeking closet. And I'm hearing the conversations in my head all the time. Like, I'm hearing them talking back and forth. So it's more like that. Like, they're very real in my head. But like a lot of times when you hear writers say, well, they went and took the story in this direction. No, they did not. No, they did not. That's not how that works, friend. So, I mean, like, to a certain extent, I let them talk to me and I listen to them talk, but I know what the conversation's going to be about. And I know, ultimately, that there's going to be a happily ever after, and what that will look like. Because a lot of times, like I said, I will go and I will fill that in because I know where that's what I want in the end. So yeah. But no, I mean, the book for the most part, like it's very forced proximity. One guy is very ugly and just been, shunned by society, and he's also a marrow, so he's not quite, human. And then the other guy is this professor nerd guy. So I know the dynamic there. You know what I mean? So they have a certain amount of room to play around and tell me what they're going to tell me, So, but yeah, it's
that sounds fun.
sort of a process, but not really.
I just love it. Like Meg, because one of the things you've said a lot, when talking about writing your next book and how the first one came on, it's kind of similar in that, like, let's kind of figure out what a situation is and see what happens. I'm thinking in Peppermint Bark, you originally had like one of their big fights happen somewhere, and then you're like, actually, no, it's going to be at a Christmas tree farm because it needed to like de-escalate it. I think a little bit was like the term you used. Like, so are you kind of similar in that way too, when you're like, figure out where we're going and then kind of reverse engineer some of those points?
Yeah, I think to Kay's point, where it's like you get to know the characters and then you sort of like, I've heard the phrase, you drive your characters up a tree and then you throw rocks at them and see how they react.
Yeah.
So it's like every character reacts in different ways, and that's part of the fun of writing a series. And Kate, with you starting with Nannies of New York and then spinning off the series of the four brothers, like how did that translate from one series into another as a spin-off?
It's again, it was almost accidental. I was talking to my bestie Reese. We're in a Zoom and we're working, and she's like, "Well, what are you doing next?" Because I think a lot of times, if you've written a book, you have this kind of grieving process, and you're just like, "What do I?" Like I always know what I'm gonna like. I have the next book, but it's just like how how do I put this one to bed and move on to the next one? But at this one point, I didn't know what I was going to do after the last Nelson MacIlwraith and the last Nanny book. And I was working on the last Nanny book, and I was like, I don't have a plan for. And she's like, well, we were talking about Max in the last Nanny book, and I was like, well, it would be funny if, uh, Max's cousins, because we had Jonathan with the whole thing. Like I knew Jonathan's book was going to be there. Like, because from the beginning with the whole Jonathan character, like people were like, oh, Jonathan has to have a book. And it started out as a joke. But before the end of the series, I was like, no, I definitely have to give this goober his own book. So I knew it was coming, and I knew it was going to be Leo. So when I was joking around with Reese, and I was like, I've got Leo, and he's got these three brothers. The princes could take New York. Oh my God, the princes are going to take New York.
What? I love that.
Like, that's like literally how it happened. It was just like, I've got these, and you kind of, if you are a smart romance writer, you will always be thinking about, give this person at least three brothers or sisters or siblings so that you have a spin-off potential.
And so you've got like people there.
Yes. And almost never have anybody be married at the beginning of the book so that, you've got, what I mean? Always leave yourself avenues.
You have to set up the dominoes, even if you're not sure which domino you're going to push down first. You have them lined up so that way people, and I think also romance readers are very savvy about that, where we see Leo show up and we're like, oh yeah, I know exactly, Leo and Theo and Teo.
Leo, yeah, like they're coming. Yeah, I do like that. There is, again, one of the things that Meg and I have talked about sometimes is, yes, tropes exist, but it's nice because it's almost like a shorthand that kind of prepares you emotionally, mentally for like what's coming, but you can also have like a little bit of comfort in that, there's going to be a happily ever after, that if something happens, you're like, it's cool. They're going to get through this. And that is one of the first things I think of when I see a character come in and they've got brothers or they've got like their best friend from college group. And I'm like, oh, fantastic. If this goes well, all these folks are getting spin-off books. And that's awesome. Because, the nannies went into this, and then we got the thing. And then who knows what's going to happen after the princes take New York. There's all this opportunity to kind of bring in different people, because we love a connected universe. We love it when people start making cameos in other books, to be like, oh yeah, remember that character from book one? Here they are here. This is delightful.
Yeah, no, it's kind of like you go in your Oprah mode when you're putting in a character. It's like you get a book and you get a book and you get a book. We're all getting books. So yeah, and I love that as a romance reader, that that as soon as somebody walks onto the page, if they're a sympathetic character, hopefully they're going to get a book at some point. If the writer's any good,
I think I read in an author's note that Ruby Dixon wrote. She said, like, if they get a name, they get a book.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, like, and you know that, especially for people who are very prolific, who are fast writers, who can push out books a lot. Whether that's, you know, novellas where, you know, you get a group of novellas of these side characters. Eden Finley's fantastic at this, where it's like, oh, Jet showed up and suddenly I have an entirely new series to roll out of this, you know, like they sort of guide the next steps in the process and the spin-offs feel obvious. And like, I love as a reader thinking through who's going to come next and trying to almost predict it. I know a lot of writers will respond to their readers and those reactions, but me as a reader, I'm like, no, I want to try to guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Ooh, I do like that. So with the new series, so Princess Take New York, I loved Jonathan's book because, you know, it's like, and they were like, Manhattan, that makes sense. And then for Truth or Spare, which is coming out soon, you're like, nah, it's not Manhattan. It's in the smallest freaking town in like New York.
So I have to ask,
nothing there.
I am an upstate New Yorker. So I am so curious how, like, and in my brain, I was going, okay, so they're in central New York because they're outside of Syracuse, but then you went up to Watertown, so you're sort of up north. I'm like visualizing this in my head, but I also know that the town that you created is sort of an amalgam of various small towns, probably like near Potsdam. Like I did the whole map in my head. My parents grew up on opposite sides of Syracuse. So how did you decide like it's going to be here? Because most people just stay in Manhattan.
I was an Army brat and my dad was stationed at Fort Drum.
There it is.
So we literally lived in Watertown and I went to high school in Philadelphia. Not Philadelphia, in Philadelphia, New York. But yeah, so it was just like, I lived in New York. I lived in upstate New York. And it was always like, my parents would never take us to New York City. And like, I always wanted to go. And I've never been. It's like on my bucket list. It's like my heart is like in New York City at any given moment, but I've never been there. It's like I'm so in love with and obsessed. I think a lot of people are, but I lived in upstate New York. So it was just one of those like, I had to throw that in at least one book, and that was the only one that was going to make sense. So
yeah, Fort Drum makes sense now that you say that. I'm like, yep, we had family that had a wedding in like Fort Drum, Messina, and I was like, what are they even doing? Like, I'm from the Finger Lakes, but now that's too rural for me.
But no, but yeah, I'm glad you recognized a lot of the area and were able to kind of pick it out and make it out.
And I think it's really fun as a writer to say like, what am I going to use that's real and what can I create on my own? So having the experience of that sort of rural environment, but also going, I'm just going to make up the town so I don't have to make it real.
Yeah. No, I definitely made up the town. Oslo's not there because I was looking for something close to Watertown that, you know, and I just also liked the idea of Theo having been to the other Oslo and wanting to see how this upstate New York Oslo compared.
So funny. It's almost like, because, you know, I live in Ontario. I'm in the Niagara Falls area right now.
Oh, nice.
You know, where we are, there's Paris, Ontario, there's London, Ontario. You know, we have a lot of places in Canada that are named after places in Europe. And that's just kind of funny. Like, oh, I went to London, Ontario. There's nothing there.
Upstate New York has Rome and Poland, and they're both tiny little Rust Belt towns.
Yes, exactly.
I find that very entertaining just as a concept to kind of show up. So when I look at, you know, Jonathan, after all, was the first book, Truth or Spare is the second one. You know, this idea of like fairy tale reimaginings kind of goes back to this idea of tropes. Like Jonathan, after all, there's this quote unquote evil character that separates the lovers and there's misunderstandings and there's all these things. Truth or Spare kind of gives us a little bit of that fish out of water type of deal with like a bit of I don't want to call him a clueless idiot, but you know,
he's bumbling. He's a bumbling royal.
We're going to call him a bumbling royal. I like that term. So I saw the titles for the next couple. So Third Crime's Charm and Milo Ashby Needs a Bad Boy. I'm so excited. But, you know, when you kind of started to conceive of the world of these royals, one of the things I found really interesting was the fact that you chose Austria and not the UK or not like a Monaco type, like they're not like Monegasque royals, like these are Austrian. And they also like the Austrian kind of Margrave system, like they're not royals in the way I think we typically see in books. Like the foundation is very prevalent in your book in terms of how it's directing things in their lives. So I would call this not really like a typical royalty story because again, they're not massively powerful and they're not, they, you know, can't go out in public. So when you started to kind of conceive of this world, as a spinoff. We got a little bit of this world in the last book in the Nanny series. How did you kind of, I'll say, do your research or kind of figure out what was this world going to be like for your version of these princes, these members of the Margrave, which is just a fun title too.
Yeah. Well, again, it goes back to I lived in Germany. It's one of the few foreign languages that I know somewhat enough that I could work with and, be competent with. But also I did want something that wasn't just a knockoff of Red, White, and Royal Blue. And I wanted it to be also like, I'm not a royalist. I'm not a huge fan of monarchy. And I wanted to be able to show something that looked functioning, but also was kind of realistic, because there are living Margraves. There's Austrian Margraves and German Margraves that are living. They're a lot older than ours. And we don't want to see them doing anything remotely kinky, but they exist, and a lot of them do kind of exist in kind of it's more of a corporation kind of run thing, and it's for tourism purposes or whatever. So I kind of wanted that, but I also wanted to be able to have them be anti-royalists as well. So it just kind of
one of them's a communist, I think.
Matteo, yeah, and we're going to find out some
gonna...
interesting things about him. I don't want to spoil anything, but there's like Robin Hood vibes there. So he's just taking advantage of the situation, but he's very anti-royalist and just hates the whole thing. He hates everything but his brothers. So, and I think that's just kind of how they're all about the whole situation.
Yeah, especially too, to kind of like mess with like this trope of like royalty in books is the fact that they grew up middle class. And it wasn't until, I guess it's still an abdication, that they were even brought into this and kind of been like, oh, yep, this is a little bit different now. Like, I think it's at the end of book 2, which I won't spoil too much about. But, they're kind of talking with Leon. He was like, yeah, I wear a watch now that has a GPS tracker in it.
No, it's embedded into his skin.
Yeah,
it's in his skin.
It's in his wrist.
Like those types of things, like to go from like middle class, like our parents married for love, I can make pasta from scratch, to like, yeah, I got a computer chip in me now.
Yeah.
In case I ever get kidnapped,
Yeah.
It's kind of the ugly side of being a royal for Leo, and he's kind of absorbed all of that for his family so that they can have the perks or whatever of, the privileges of being in the royals without like having the foundation mess with their lives as much.
I want to talk about like this shift, because I feel like when we were growing up, or even 10 or 20 years ago, it was Prince Charming comes and he saves you and you get this big, Cinderella ball, in the same way that like 50 Shades of Grey came out, and it's like the billionaire comes and saves the girl who works at the corporation and brings her up and gives her everything she could want. And I feel like in the past, I would say like 5-ish years, we've seen this big trend in romance to being sort of anti-royal, anti-capitalist, anti-billionaire. Are you seeing that showing up in your writing, or how's that following with the trends, and how much of that was just your personal, alignment of your own values as you're writing?
Well, I think that, you guys have seen it in the books. I take pot shots at billionaires and royals all the time, and we're constantly commenting on how useless billionaires are and how most of them are. So it's always trying to make a billionaire like Walker Cameron seem like the anti-billionaire and not, a monster. Because there's no way that you can. There's no way to ethically be a billionaire. They're just. But for the sake of a romance novel and for the people who, want those kinds of books, it's all about making a palatable billionaire or a palatable royal. And again, going back to, just kind of, I guess in a way, subverting what you would consider to be, your classic billionaire or your royal, and taking them out of that and, I guess, humanizing them, because, I don't read about anybody like, that guy. Those guys. So,
I mean, let's be serious. Nobody wants to read about a romance novel where the character looks like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk. We just they also have to be incredibly handsome at the same time.
Yeah.
Like, I believe in diversity of characters. They can be messy, but I was like, nobody wants to see Bezos get a happy ever after.
No. And honestly, they don't deserve it. They don't deserve it. So it is like it's trying to balance so that they deserve it and you're rooting for them. But, you kind of have to acknowledge as well that, there's just no such thing as a cool billionaire. They just aren't. So I'm constantly threading that in. And I think that, I don't know that I see a lot of my readers pushing back against some of them. Although I did have one reviewer say something about, my billionaires seem very British because they talk on the phone to prime ministers. And it's like, there are like 30 prime ministers in the world.
Also
We
true.
aren't, we're,
Canada has one, although he just resigned the other day, so drama.
Oh God. Listen, I have been away from all of the news and everything since early November. I've completely lived in a bubble, but now I got on Blue Sky yesterday and I'm starting to see the news and I'm like, what the hell is going on? We're merging with Canada and Canada doesn't have a prime minister. What the hell?
There's a lot going on, and this is why we have the escapism we do in this genre. Speaking of the genre broadly, Kay, like, what do you like to read? Like, Meg and I often talk about certain tropes that we like or certain authors that we read, everything. Like, what, you mentioned you're a voracious reader just as much as you are an author. So what's your jam? What's your go-to?
Well, I don't read as much as I used to before I started writing because I feel like I'm trying to push out a book a month. So, which I used to almost do, but I've slowed down. But when I do read, definitely like lately more rom-coms. I think before things went really crazy, I used to read anything but romances because I'm constantly in that and you're using those ingredients and dealing with those all the time that I would need, I would need the variety. So I would read a lot of thrillers and nonfiction. Like my first book was originally like my dream book was going to be a historical kind of look at World War I and World War II and the relationship between France and Germany. So I used to read a lot of stuff like in that kind of direction. But then like now it's almost constantly, I need the fluff, I need the softness, I need the bubble of the rom-com mostly. So I kind of stay there. Oh gosh, I really love like lately, like Friends to Lovers has been like kind of my happy spot. That kind of, somebody you already know and love, but then, the changing of that relationship and the nature of that love just really kind of super like double soft.
You know what's funny is I feel like people either, when they're looking for escapism, they all either go to that like super sweet childhood friends to lovers, kind of low angst, easy cupcake romance, or they go like mafia, dark, dragons, dippers,
It's a different type of catharsis, really. Like vigilante justice, murder everybody but sex, or this is so nice, but still sex.
But I'm writing that, so I've got that. With my Patreon and with Lake Cliff, I get to write the really dark stuff and kill the bad billionaires, and like all the angst that I have, I can put it all in there. So because I can't I live in the fluff because I'm always writing it and I'm reading it a lot, but every now and then you need that outlet. You need to blow somebody up or, so yeah, it's, you've got to have balance. You need
We need like happy fucking, we need angry fucking, we need like lots of blood and gore, we need sweet nothings and pet names. Honestly, it's a self-sustaining, balanced ecosystem at the end of the day. This is what makes it sustainable.
I feel like now we just need like
all the personalities.
We need like a vigilante baker though.
Well, no, it reminds me.
She kills people with gluten-free, like people who have gluten intolerances. She kills them with gluten.
Gives them so much gluten. No,
oh my god, that's so funny.
Of back when I was like huge into like anime and manga, there was a manga and a TV show, a German name called Weißkreuz, like White Cross, and they were a bunch of assassins by night, but they owned a flower shop by day. And it was just, this was like back in the early aughts. It was a great series. I had like the Chinese bootleg that I got from a box on the side of the road in Chinatown.
But I feel like
it was such a really fun.
Like in the same way that Walter White has his car wash business as a way to like launder all of his money, you could have this flower shop or bakery, and then in the warehouse underneath it, you have this murder factory.
Mr. Lavender, Mr. Lavender, my assassin, he has a side hustle. He does ties and like fancy, like pocket squares and stuff. And he has like a shop in Savile Row. And so by day he makes men's accoutrement, and then at night he kills people. So
Right. Everybody needs a
balance.
hobby.
It's a little
all-
shop of
it's all about
horrors,
balance.
but silk.
Oh, I do like that. Okay, that's kind of fun. So you have Truth or Spare coming out. You've got the Nelson and McIlwraith series. What is kind of because I'm an operations professional by day. What is as you get closer to a release date, as you're starting to engage with ARC readers and all these other things. What does kind of the lead up to a book release and then the release look like for you? Like, how do you like to engage with that as an act of writing? How do you feel
No,
about when it actually goes out?
no, I hate everything but the writing. And like as a writer, we have to do so many other things but the writing. Like
Mm-hmm.
you have to be like the jack of all trades, and it's just like as in the writers we have this way of upping the ante constantly, like, oh, we need more swag, and then we need this, and and we got to have an audiobook, or you got to have this and that, and it's like we're constantly giving ourselves more things to juggle. So no, I wish that I could just write the books. And for a while I had an amazing assistant who was working for me pro bono, and that was like kind of like the glory days for me, because I could just say, Lindsay, do some promo for me. I don't want to do any of that this week. I just want to write.
Mm-hmm.
So, but no, the week before, the weeks before release, I try to give a month if I can for ARC reading. But that doesn't always, like, I don't think I'm going to have the time with Tides, because that comes out in
Mm-hmm.
March 15, and I'm trying to have that done um, February 14th, which I
Mm-hmm.
did not realize that was Valentine's Day when I set that up with my person. But yeah, so I have roughly a month in there for arcs, and then you try to get those out, and then it's just trying to engage. I don't have a street team anymore,
Mm-hmm.
because I don't have the battery, the bandwidth for that kind of stuff, especially with my anxiety. Just being on social media is so hard. Like it's the most ridiculous thing to say, but like, if I drop a post, nothing happens. That's fine. But the worst thing that could happen is that it could go like quasi viral, or like 30
Mm-hmm.
people will respond, because like once the notifications start pinging, it feels like the worst kind of work for me. And like having to talk to people, interact, it's very difficult for me, because I'm always like, what if I say the wrong thing, or what if this doesn't come across as funny as I want? And I will get into my head so deeply just for like one little, like a little reply, and it's like, and I'll hit send, and it's like, oh God, what did I do? So like, I'm just not meant for social media, like, at all. Like, it's the worst for me.
I
But
feel
then
like
yeah, like,
writing long form content, writing books, writing novels, like there's such a craft of being able to have the space to create a full story. And then we have to
yes.
take that and distill it down into, here's a one paragraph snippet that's going to get you to buy this 100,000 word book in 100 words. And if I don't translate it correctly, then it's not going to go viral and people won't hear about it. And like, these are two very different competing skill sets, to have space for long form and then to convert it into short form. It's not an easy task.
No, and the thing is, like, you can get the hang of it, but you will get the hang of it for 10 minutes, because the trend is going to
Yeah.
change. The platform is going to change. The algorithm is going to change. So you're constantly on shifting sand, trying to do these things that don't make sense to you, that you don't, that aren't natural for you. And you're trying to fake it until you make it. But then, yeah, it's just like Zuckerberg decides to go whatever. So, and then you're like on a new platform today, and it's just, that's like the worst.
And sex positive romance. Like, there are now all of these rules about the words that you cannot say, and you can get, shadow banned. And like, even if you're trying to do the right thing and tell people appropriate sexual activities, guess what? you're not going to be able to be shown to them. And it's even
No.
harder for illustrators. Like
Mm-hmm.
the things that they get pinged for is just, it's wild how
Yeah.
completely puritanical some of these systems are, when like they're billionaires who are problematic in their own way, like we've already said.
Well, it's like
Mm-hmm.
they're gonna remove the fact checking so that, all the grossness is gonna come back, but they're going to hold us to these crazy puritanical standards when it comes to the content we're creating. So it's a wild environment right now, and
They will remove the fact checking and they will remove the trolling ability to take people off the comments. So it's going to become a much worse platform in the next 4 years.
yeah, and it's going to be really
Yeah.
hard if you are doing sex positive content. Like if I can't sell my books on Instagram and Facebook, where am I going now? Because I just left
Mhm.
Twitter, early
Mhm.
November, and now I'm looking at leaving Instagram and moving to Blue Sky, which I had 0 followers this morning, and I think I have like
Mhm.
15 now. So it's like,
Mhm.
where are we going to market our content? Once you figure
Mhm.
out how, or you get a brand together, everyone's like, get your brand, figure out your brand, and you figure it out. But then it's just like, where do you go with that? Where
Yeah.
do you?
Mhm.
Where are the readers? So that's always the
Mhm.
challenge.
Yeah, the business of being an author, we've
Yeah.
talked about a couple times on the show with a couple other authors that we've interviewed. And, as entrepreneurs, again, I do believe authors have to be entrepreneurs in that, like, it's it's a very tough thing to market yourself. Generally speaking, it does feel like, especially a couple of years ago, like, 2020, 2019 to 2021, I think I felt this the most was I had a second full-time job as a content creator to be visible, to have a personal brand, to bring in business, to bring in income, and all those things. So I think it's so funny to me because I do believe that books are art, that I am a patron of the arts, that this is the stuff that gets us through so much. Yet it is also something where artists essentially have to monetize their work, and monetization of their work has to be so top of mind because that's how you survive. And
Right.
it is sad that that is where it's at for everyone. Who knew this episode was going to be talking about, like, we are anti-capitalist, anti-billionaire, like, let's talk about censorship and social media. But ultimately, I think it is very much on top of people's minds today, especially we're recording this episode in early January, where who knows what's happening with TikTok. Zuckerberg is announcing things. For the Americans, their inauguration is coming up. Like, there's all this stuff. It's like, can't we just write books about pretty people fucking?
Yeah,
Like,
I know.
love
And I
it.
was thinking about that this morning. I was like,
Mhm.
by the time this podcast comes out, things could be changed so dramatically, like in
Yeah.
social media and in our politics, that like, who knows like what the climate's going to be when this comes out, and
No
how
idea.
much of this is even going to be, I
Mhm.
don't even know. Like, well, I'm waiting for next month, like what's going to happen with my book release, because
Mhm.
so much is up in
Who
the
knows?
air. It's
And
crazy.
Yeah.
let's not talk about bots and generative AI either.
I was like, that we need a whole other couple hours for that. I need to,
I'll
like,
do that. I'll do
stretch
that on my other podcast where we actually talk
breathing.
about that in the
Yeah.
marketing and online business space. But I think also to your point,
Mhm.
like you are an independent author, you want to publish independently, but it requires you to do all this extra stuff. But in our next episode next week, we're going to be talking to Alexa Martin, who's traditionally published, and she is, even though she's traditionally published, even though she has an agent and a publisher, she is still expected to do all of her own social media.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
it's not even like,
Mm.
oh, the indie authors have to do this and the traditional authors just get to write. There's still an expectation of you have to build your audience yourself. If you are an
Mhm.
author, you have to build your brand regardless of the type of publishing that you're doing. So I want to put that out there too, that there
Mhm.
is
Oh,
no right
absolutely.
solution to this.
No,
No.
no. And honestly, it's my best friend Reese, I was telling you about, she's traditionally published mostly, and she's just starting to do releasing her first indie books. And she was doing the exact same type of grinding that I'm doing on social media 24/7. Like, it's
Mhm.
the same. It's the same type of hustle. And like, she's just having to share some of it with her agent, and
Mm-hmm.
the publisher's taking a big cut of her book. So honestly, it's exact. We do the exact same type of stuff. The exact team. So, like, this is literally the same. Like, we're passing
Mhm.
tips back and forth and saying, hey, today's the Friday kiss. Reese, get out there and do your Friday kiss. And she's reminding
Mhm.
me to like get into the Zoe
Mhm.
Bub. And it's just like we're both doing
Mhm.
like identical stuff. She's just, in a different game than I am, a slightly different game. So, but it's the same type of hustle.
So before we head into our final question, Kay, you have a couple books coming out. How can people support you? What do you want to tell them about the upcoming releases? What do you want to tease folks with today?
Okay, well, yeah, we have Truth or Spare coming out in February, And that's the second book of our Princess Take New York series. So yeah, please pre-order that if you haven't read Jonathan or the Nanny books. I would encourage you or hope you would check it out. Although they're all supposed to be standalones, so that you can just jump in and enjoy them. But yeah, so that's coming out, and then a month later we have Tides, the spinoff, the second spinoff of Nelson MacIlwraith. But you can find me on, I guess, on Blue Sky now. I'm on there now.
Ooh.
I'm kind of still on Instagram until I guess eventually move over there. So you can find me there too. And kstirlingbooks.com. I usually post things on my website for if you want to like find out about arcs or what's coming up soon or where to find things like signed paperbacks. That's all there.
We will put
Amazing.
all of those notes in there. We'll put a link to, if you have BookBub, we'll make sure that people can follow you on Amazon, wherever it makes sense for them to follow you. We'll make sure that they can track you down. And if you want to come respond to this episode, we'll make sure to send any information to Kay and get her feedback on it. If you want to respond in our Substack, you can come on over and leave a comment for us there about what your favorite Kay Stirling book is, or you can hit us up on Instagram or TikTok at First Dates and Soulmates.
We're there for now. Who knows? The landscape is changing.
You can
All
always
right.
get us in your ears, though. That's why we're
True.
here. That's why we're doing it on audio, is so that we own it and we can support the authors that we want to support in a way that is not, it's still based on an algorithm, but we can have these longer conversations that aren't just limited to 90 seconds of information.
We'll make it happen. All right, let's get into our final question of what we are shipping this week. Meg, let's kick it off with you. What are you shipping this week?
Okay, I'm going to share a series that I am mildly obsessed with. It is written by two upstate New York authors, which is why I decided to bring it up in this one. Two Buffalo authors, Jessica Topper and Amanda Usen, are writing a series called The Matzo Baller. So it is a Jewish holiday romance series. Both of them are Jewish authors, and they're in my local romance writer group here in Rochester. And they saw so many holiday romances that were just Christmas and went, what if we write books and every single book happens during the days of Hanukkah? So it's year over year. They both released a book in the series last year that were the first two of 8 characters that all met at their year course in Israel, and they've stayed friends. And so every book in the series has a moment where they go onto their annual cruise of the New York harbor that they call the Matzo Baller. And so each of the books has a different sort of Jewish tie-in into the title. So there's the Dreidel Do-Over and the Rugelach Road Trip, right? It's so good. And the Menorah Matchmaker. So
cute.
all of them have these tie-ins, and all 8 of the characters will eventually get their own books. But the moment where I was like, I am in, this is it, is I have coffee every quarter with 2 of my friends who are Jewish. And as I was writing my holiday romance, as I was writing Peppermint Bark, they're like, no, we need you to write a Jewish one. I want there to be a strip dreidel scene. And I found it. I didn't have to write it. Amanda Usen's Dreidel Do-Over has a strip dreidel scene, and it is
amazing.
The
Epic.
thing I didn't know I wanted. Oh my God, that's amazing. All right, I'm a fan. Kay, what about you? What are you shipping this week?
Okay, I got 2 things. First, I just read Marshmallow Mountain by my good buddy Maddie Wardell, M.A. Wardell, and A.J. Truman. Both brilliant authors, and I had a blast with that, and I'm looking forward to the rest of that series. But also my bestie Reese Ryan, I was telling you about her first indie series, her Love and Music suite. Book 3 is coming out this Friday. More Than Friends. So you already know it's, friends to lovers. But the series is really brilliant. I'm loving it. It's about this group of most of them are like musicians, producers, but they went to a performing arts school in Atlanta, and they were going back for their reunion, and the school was in trouble. So there's like one book was about, like a fundraiser to get the school together or to keep the school funded and open. So it follows this group of former friends and stuff. And there's There's like there's just all kinds of different tropes, and like each book is they're so hot. And if you read any of Reese Ryan's books when she was with Harlequin or Grand Central, she's always been just the queen of Black romance. But I love about her indie books that she is just like the ropes are off. She's like coming out and like just like blazing, like it's like leaving a trail of fire behind her with these new indie books and this new series. They are so hot and so fun, and it's all the things that I think that she wanted to do when she was with the trad houses. But she's just having fun with it, and these are just so fun and so Reese. And I'm just like loving every bit of it.
Oh my God, I love that. I've definitely read Reese Ryan before, so I'm excited to catch the indie series and roll into that. Nikki, what about you? What are you shipping this week?
I am finally getting around to reading the second book in the Honorably Discharged series. It's a co-write with Nora Phoenix and E.M. Lindsay. Okay. It's called Bean, is book 2. It came out in December. I just got around to reading it now. And I love it because, you know, it has some of my favorite things. It has age gap, friends with benefits. It's got a little bit of hurt comfort, which I also like. But what makes this one really interesting is one of the characters has a TBI, which is why a traumatic brain injury, which is why they were discharged from the military. So they forget things. So the book blurb kind of talks about, you know, after my discharge from the army, I've had to reinvent myself, even if I don't remember what I had for breakfast, or the hot older guy I went home with. So he has like this one night stand and doesn't remember.
Oh no.
And so, cause he hits on him again, and the guy's like, excuse you, like, we've already hooked up, like, what the shit? And then he's like, oh, you know, then he kind of gets, you know.
Was it good?
It was good, but also like, you forgot about me, but you're still hitting on me. I'm oddly flattered. So it's really funny. I find that this author, they do a lot of co-writes that I've read. They have like this beautiful charm to it. It's always beautifully written. I'm not one for like military style books, generally speaking. But like, I love this whole series. It's been very, very fun to read. So Bean, Honorably Discharged, book 2 is delightful. And there is a book 3 coming out at some point, but not until later in the year. So highly recommend. We will link all of those in the show notes. And thus concludes January and our month of characters who are looking to improve themselves and their lives. I hope you enjoyed this month of we're going to make our lives better and we're going to become better humans. It's great fun. Kay, thank you so much for joining us. We very much appreciate you. You know, let's all get out of our comfort zones. We're all looking to try new things this year. We appreciate it so much. And we will link to all of your social media links and books in the show notes. This has been delightful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I had fun. I'm like, the nerves are finally wearing off. I had fun.
Just as we're being recording, yes.
I love it. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. Be sure to check us out on Substack, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Give us a rate, review, and subscribe. Coming up next week, we are talking with author Alexa Martin. It's football stuff in time for Super Bowl. Nikki's not a football fan or knows much about it, but it'll be great. I'm looking forward to that discussion. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.